Hello, everyone. Hopefully, everyone is getting into the webinar okay. Thank you very much for joining us today for this digital launch for Fresh and Salt, Focus on Water, which was MPT's November issue, published at the end of last year, edited by Kairani Barocca. My name is Sarah Hesketh, and I am the managing editor at Modern Poetry in Translation. I have short brown hair, and I'm wearing a purple jumper today, my brown glasses, and my red earrings. We are delighted today to hopefully welcome two of our contributors to this issue. I say hopefully, we're having a little bit of trouble patching Eric in, but hopefully he will be able to join us shortly. I'm delighted, however, that we do have Thila Varghese with us, who is joining us from Canada today. It is currently 8 a.m. there, so thank you, Thila, for getting up and joining us for today's reading.
Thank you for inviting me, Sarah.
You're very welcome. Oh, I can see Eric has appeared. This is great. In the meantime, I would also like to welcome Hayley and Michelle, who are providing our BSL interpretation today. Thank you to them for joining us. Hi, Eric. Welcome to
hello.
event today. I'm so pleased we have managed to get you in. Eric is joining us from the Philippines today, where I believe it's coming up to 9 p.m. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is 9 p.m. here.
That's great. So we've got people at both ends of the time scale. Just to say, we're going to have readings today from both Thila Varghese and Eric, from the work that they published in the magazine, and some more translations and poetry from them. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So if you do have a question whilst you're watching, then do please feel free to add it to the Q&A box, and we will try and get through as much as we can at the end. So our first poet reading today is going to be Thila. And Thila works part-time as a senior writing advisor at Western University. Her translations from Tamil have been published widely in international journals, and we're delighted to have been able to feature her work in this issue of MPT, and also that she's able to join us today. So Thila, would you like to tell us some more about your work and give us your reading?
Thank you for inviting me, Sarah. My name is Thila Varghese. I am one of the contributors to MPT's Water Focus issue. Today, I'm wearing glasses and a blue sweater. I would like to start with the translations of Tamil poems by S. Vijayalakshmi and Sakti Jyoti, published in the current Water Focus issue, followed by two other poems by the same authors, one each. The first poem is Beauty by the Tamil poet S. Vijayalakshmi. The original Tamil title of the poem is Vanappu. In her poem Beauty, Vijayalakshmi brings attention to the dried up riverbeds and fast forwards to a time when the land looks pale like a sick woman having lost its natural beauty, at which time only photographs will have to be used to show for posterity what it was like when the flood water overflowed. With rivers, shores, and forests reduced to concrete buildings, produce is grown in terrace gardens and groceries are delivered by drone. The almanac predictions of rains are short-lived, while foreign companies claim even the limited amount of deep borewell water for commercial purposes. The poet laments over the scenario in which the beauty of the land and the evergreen landscape of yesteryears can only be seen on paper. Beauty. At a time when the land looks pale like a sick woman with dried up rivers, devoid of quarried out riverbed sand and prevalent mirages. We could show the photographs and say, look, this is how the flood overflowed. Where are the rivers? Where are the shores? Where are the forests? Everything is reduced to barren hard soil and concrete buildings. We cook drumsticks and chilies grown in our terrace gardens, while groceries are delivered by drone to our neighbor Bhagavi's home. Whether almanac predictions come true or not, the forecasted rains, rivers, and water supplies remain short-lived. That is world politics, said someone. Hey, let's save the water that falls and then talk politics, said a wayfarer. Deep borewell water yielded 600 liters. Even those are pumped out and sold by only foreign companies. Meanwhile, the beauty of nature and Sangam-age land divisions, mountain areas, forest regions, paddy field landscapes, and localities related to oceans are seen as chlorophyll pigments only to be seen on paper. The next poem, Sempayal, which is also the title of the Tamil poem, is by the same author. In Sempayal, poet Vijayalakshmi presents an alternate picture of healthy land that receives the seasonal rains it earns for its productivity and well-being of all living things. The ritualistic preparations of getting the paddy seeds ready for the fields is followed by the much-awaited monsoons, in the wake of which the landscape transforms into a glorious celebration of nature as the enormous flow of heavy rainwater inexplicably blends with fine, rich, reddish soil like a man and a woman bound together in love. Sempayal. She looked at him deeply, and aloe vera split open. With his hand, he searched for the grains inside the pot in which Kattiyanam red rice was stored. He took out some grains and, rubbing them in the palm of his hand, he put them in his mouth. The taste of the grains unfolded inside the corner of his cheeks. In the water that burst out of aloe vera, he mixed the Kattiyanam grains. With the paddy seeds heaped on the ground, the grain pot was placed on top of the heap as a kalasam, the crowning ornament. The monsoon season in the offing, the living creatures and the fresh terrain yearned for the rivers of the forest. As it thundered, torrential rains flooding the forest river morphed into an enormous flow of Sempayal, the heavy rainfall, inextricably blended with the fine, rich, reddish soil. The next two poems are by the Tamil poet Satyajyothi. The first one is Water. The Tamil title of the poem is Tanir. In her poem Water, poet Satyajyothi captures the grim reality of freshwater scarcity. As water, one of the basic human needs for survival, continues to dwindle, the desperate search for water is set in motion. The narrator in the poem runs 12 miles and could find only 3 earthenware pitchers of water, not enough to quench the thirst. The far and wide search results in just a spoonful of liquid from inside a palm fruit and a pitcher full of water from a clear stream. The narrator then runs to the rivers for more water, but they are waiting for the rain. While everyone anxiously waits for fresh water, the gravity of the situation is further aggravated by the seas engulfing everything. Water. They said they wanted water. I ran 12 miles. Drinking 3 earthenware pitchers of water was not enough, so I started roaming far and wide in search of water. I looked for it inside the palm fruit. A spoonful was obtained, In a clear stream, I managed to scoop out a pitcher full of water. Even that was not enough. So I turned to the rivers. They were waiting for the rain. The clouds were calm. The wind was tight-lipped. The land remained silent. While the world awaited fresh water, the oceans engulfed everything. The next poem by Asymptote is The River Devoid of Sand. The original Tamil title of the poem is Manal Illada Aaru. As if lack of fresh water is not bad enough, ongoing sand excavations and riverbeds pose additional threat to biodiversity and ecosystem as presented in Asymptote's poem, The River Devoid of Sand. A riverside bustling with communal activities involving the young and the old alike, and all living creatures, is deserted at the sound of the yellow lorries that arrive howling like giants to haul from riverbeds huge quantities of sand in which small snails curl up and die. The poet deplores the indiscriminate hauling of sand for commercial purposes, which not only depletes nutrients and life forms from the riverside, but also negatively impacts the natural water recharge, further reducing access to the precious resource. The river devoid of sand. Someone has uprooted and tossed aside the plants we had planted on the riverside. Missing are the pebbles we had kept aside for Tatangal game. The elderly who feed puffed rice to baby fish didn't come today. The little girls who scoop out water from underneath the sand for fun run away terrified. Howling like giant wolves arrive the yellow lorries. About to crash down in just a few minutes are the neem trees we use for drying our washed clothes. Inside the dugout sand the lorries haul, small snails curl up and die. Moving on to translations of two other Tamil poems by S. Vijayalakshmi and Asymptote, which address different themes. The first poem, Fragrance, by S. Vijayalakshmi, focuses on reality of relationships, vulnerabilities, and possibilities. The Tamil title is Narumanam. Fragrance. The conversation proceeded very smoothly. In the voice that was preaching to me like a profoundly wise man, honey drops were mixed with sweetness. The figure hiding behind the rough voice smiled, the mask having slugged off. The night breeze gathered up the courtesy words and departed. As the desire to share everything stimulated the conversation, while the voice inside cautioned me to wait. The clock hand picked out to check whether everything was going well and laughed. Within the boundaries of the conversation, 1,000 bouquets extended their welcome. Paradise opened and invited me, like a sales agent, to come in. Leaning against the door, my soul struggled with the weight of the boundary line's bouquets, unable to bear the load. Even as I contemplated on which foot to put forward first, to step into the paradise, an oracle declared, "Enough with your cautionary instinct and analysis, just discard them and come in." What to do with all the fragrances from the countless stars that bloomed within me? Again, I draw a line. The flames are burning, like those on the line of a circus ring of fire. You seem to appear the same as I do, and both of us are wearing bulletproof vests. The bullets are waiting in the tidal wave of conflicts. The next and final poem, The Painting of a Dream by Asymptote, explores the idea of painting a dream with precision. and the potential prize that could come with it. The Tamil title is Ovia Kanavu, the painting of a dream. I am drawing an image of me that remains embedded in an undissolved dream of mine. I try to put together a figure by extending the lines in the summer and contracting them in the winter, stretching the lines farther and erasing some of them as unwanted. I painted it with colors specific to each season. It was only during the times passed in searching for brushes and colors to paint with precision all the details, such as the loneliness that is undissolved by anything at all, the love that remains inexhaustible even after given away fully, the bitterness that cannot be swallowed and digested, and the guileless laughter that blooms without searching for a reason. It dawned on me that when the painting is completed exactly the way I want it, I would have forgotten what it is like to dream.
Thank you, Thila, for giving us such a beautiful first reading today. We will come back hopefully to discuss some of your work and translations after we've heard from Eric. So Eric, welcome. Eric is joining us today from, I think, near Iloilo City in the
Yeah.
Philippines. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Welcome.
Yeah.
And Eric is a writer, lecturer, translator whose work we have published a couple of times now in MPT. You can find him in journals all over the world. And his own debut collection of poems, and I hope I have the title, An Invitation to See the Leaves Outside. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is published shortly by Flower Song Press.
Yeah.
So Eric, if you'd like to read for us your work, we'd be very happy to hear it.
Yeah. So hello everyone. I'm very honored to be here. I apologize for the delay earlier. I hope things go smoothly so this time. So I'm going to read 4 poems in my translation. 2 of them are already in the latest issue of Modern Poetry and Translation, and the 2 new ones are are new. um, I'll keep my I'll try not to contextualize them so much because they're pretty straightforward. And before I start, I'd like to share for some of our readers. I'm Eric Abalajon, a poet and translator from Iloilo province, the Philippines. And at the moment, I have short black hair and wearing a dark blue shirt today. So the first poem is by Genevieve Asenjo. It's titled Let Us Learn from the Indigenous. The dam has not been built yet, but they already know many of them will drown. That's why their bodies are not a hindrance to the elderly while going down to the lowlands, in order to shout how the multinationals have taken their water, land, minerals, lives. They have learned in the mountains there is no hunger amid the lush and fertile soil. In the plains, the need to buy exists. Everything is bought. They shouldn't need to shout. The holes in their slippers and shoes is the story of us all. For the next point, this is from Jason Tabinas. It's titled, Why Don't You Flee the Town? The flood only passes by the house. The flood only passes by our house. Why don't you flee the town? This is where our house is. This is where our land is. Why don't you flee the town? This is where our friends and our acquaintances are. This is where our memories reside. Why don't you flee the town? because no one chooses where they will be born. This is where we grew up and got married. Why don't you flee the town? This is where our loved ones are buried. This is also where we will die. Why don't you flee the town? And where exactly will we start over? And the next poem is by May Morales Dolis. This is one of the poems included in the latest issue. It's titled Pasham, which is the original Filipino title. Uh, because as me and Dolis discussed it, the translation can't quite encapsulate its meaning. So Pasham basically refers to funeral prayers. Yeah. I'll just read it. There are funeral prayers. One can no longer tell who passed away first and should be prayed over for 9 days. The paths have become entangled towards houses with dim lights and dreary flower stands. The candles are confused as to whom their tears are for. Each family's gate is open. They are in disarray. Their loved ones have poison in their bones, and it is spreading, creating a storm in the blood and rushing up to the spine and brain. Delirious, their saliva merges with the bubbles in the shore, kissing rocks that have turned red, that eventually tourists would step on, eager to witness the tragedy of others. And for the last poem, this is by Jaku Mata. This poem is available on the online version of the issue, the limited access. And I actually learned much later that this is actually where the title of the issue came from. And I'm glad the editorial team liked it that much. So the title is Before the City Goes Underwater. I apologize if I consider the city and its establishments as my enemies. But for you, I will set aside my anger and bring you to its heart before the city goes underwater. We will start inside the buildings where successful protest marches have passed by. We will chase each other as fast as the flow of speeding jeepneys. We will then rest our exhausted feet under the shade of the bridge. We will consume history in a few bites of siopaw. We will greet the new souls, renting the vacant holes in walls that have lost their former meaning. In city proper, the sea has started to lick the streets, flooding even if the sun has been up since yesterday. On its last days, I would like to gaze at my city with you beside me, and we will count the bodies in the bodies of water, those who didn't listen to the visions of the fishes in the river, where fresh and salt water will mix. We will jump from the rooftops of the jeepneys floating and end the day going home with you having learned how to swim. Okay. Thank you. And that's
Thank you, Eric, for another beautiful reading. It is lovely to hear all of these poems out loud, having spent so much time enjoying reading them. I have some questions that I would like to ask both of you, but also I would encourage anybody watching or listening that if you have any questions that you would like to ask as well, that you put them into the Q&A box and we can hopefully cover those as well. My first question, and perhaps Thila might want to answer it first, is your translation of The Painting of a Dream. I was wondering, does the idea of the act of poetry translation as the painting of a dream, of something that needs to be moved from a dream to a different medium, does that have any truth as a metaphor for your own translation practice? And do you identify maybe with that price paid that the poet is suggesting at the end of that poem when your own translation work is complete? So Thila, maybe we'll start with you and then the same question to Eric. Oh, we can't quite hear you, Thila.
All right, sorry
Okay.
about that. All right. I think, you have two questions there. And for the first question, yes. First one, yes. The second one, no. Yes, the idea of the act of poetry translation as painting of a dream holds true as a metaphor for me. The preparation, the work involved in poetry translation, they're similar to those a speaker undertakes to paint. And however, I do not identify the price paid that the speaker suggests at the end of that poem. When the work is complete, and if I feel that I've done a reasonably good job, I'm happy about it. But that doesn't mean I feel that I have paid the price, which is painting the dream with precision. I think it is, and it will always remain, an ever-eluding dream. And that's what keeps the translator in a state of constant striving. I would imagine the same holds true for the poet as well.
Thank you. Eric, how do you feel about this particular metaphor?
Painting the dream. It's, it's a bit hard. I think painting the dream. I think I'm going to insert something a bit different. For example, the local word, the Filipino word for translation is salin. So that, that literally means translate, but it's also like transferring something from one container to another, especially water actually. So I really like that word because I think that it really encapsulates what a translator does. You transfer something into something slightly different for it to be more accessible to a different set of audience, I guess. And when the question of whether you identified for the price paid, I feel like that's really hard to answer. I think, I mean, the mere act of experiencing one poem, I think that's already, a powerful experience itself. You don't have, it doesn't have to be very the end goal of reading a translation doesn't have to be deliberate, I think. And once something is out there and it's being read, I consider that as, that's already an achievement by itself. I'm not sure if that's a very good answer to that question.
It's a tricky question, but I'm glad you were both able to get an answer to it. The work that you have both read today, perhaps because water is such a vital and politicized resource, both of your work speaks directly really to political and social concerns in the poems that you're translating. And I was wondering what, if any, pressure, either from yourself or maybe from publishers or maybe from readers or maybe from the writers or communities that you are translating out of, how much pressure you might feel in this current, very tricky historical moment to translate poetry that speaks to injustices, that speaks to pressures on specific communities. How much do you feel your role as a translator becomes, whether you like it or not, a sort of role of spokesperson or advocate? And maybe Eric, we might come to you first this time, if that's okay.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah. Well, first things off, like I wouldn't. Well, yeah, pressure. It's interesting answering this because I did come to poetry with a very clear political lens when I was started reading. So it's always been there. Even if before I was translating, I always find it there. Uh, when it comes to publishing it, it's tricky because a lot of literary establishments, I think here or in many places, they would often prioritize poetry, in a very sanitized or a very a safe manner. But then again, if you live in a place or in a context where these things keep happening to you, like tragedies and disasters, sooner or later it's gonna find its way in the literature. And if you pay attention to like the history of literature, it comes out pretty often and pretty much always, even before concepts like eco poetry, for example, which is a emerging field right now. Even before that term was coined, people were already writing eco poetry because it plays a very big part in their lives because uh yeah, it's either they experience it, for example, like Jason Tabinas, who comes from Monsoon Pat province here. He has an entire book about life in the monsoon area. And then there's also poems like by May Dollis and uh Genevieve Asenio, where it's more of like a poetry of witness. You may not necessarily experience it, but you see it around, and you see suffering, you see tragedies, you see injustices, and you are compelled to like put it down, write it down. And I think the role of the translator, it becomes very important because these stories don't circulate like as much as you would like them to be. So there's this very heavy ethical considerations on like what to translate. And what I do is, for example, in my process, for example, I collaborate a lot with the authors I translate. So we clarify like, oh, what do you want to say exactly? And if I translate something that's not quite the exact goal, I let them know, and then we negotiate it. So my translation projects, it's well defined, it's politically well defined. And I think I'm also attracted to poets who also have very clear political projects infused in their creative intentions too.
All right, thank you. And Thila, the same question to you.
Okay, I think the poets are focusing on these type of ecological issues and injustices visited upon specific communities more so now than before. And I won't say I feel the pressure to translate such poetry, but as a translator, if I do come across poetry in which the authors eloquently present compelling perspectives on the issues Sarah brought attention to, yes, I would translate such poetry. And publishers' interest in such topics has increased noticeably in the recent past. And, like, for example, the issues, special issues by MPT, like in recent years. So, and that has opened possibilities of, translations being read by, the readers.
Thank you. Just as a sort of follow-up question, really, to you, Eric, saying that you collaborate. Do you find that the poets that you are in touch with in the Philippines, that you are working with, that they are coming to you saying, please, I'd like you to translate this work? Or is there still a sort of I don't want to make the translator sound sort of like a dictator, but I guess I'm interested in the power dynamics between the poets themselves and the translators in those communities. So are poets coming to translators, or do you find translators are still excuse me, going to poets and choosing the work that they want to translate, I suppose, for an English speaking audience in your case?
Yeah. Oh, well, in my case, I'm the one who approach people. So I often just pay attention to like new books or new chapbooks being produced. And then I approach them. I tell the authors, like, I really like your work and I was wondering if, we could collaborate. And I have worked with, for example, Giacomata and May. They're the more hands-off translator, as long as you don't, distort something, or if the meaning is not too far off, they're fine with it. I've also worked with someone who deliberately writes in English, so he's more I think it's Gio, actually, the one I translated for the food issue. He also writes in English, so also he's slightly more conscious and like how his work would come out in English. But in general, it's a very it involves a lot of negotiation. And since Philippines is multilingual and it's an anglophone country, translation by default is always a collaboration, because the people I translate also know how to speak English, and they probably also read a lot in English too. And yeah, and it's something, I don't consider it as a burden or as like a form of delay. It's actually a very fulfilling experience doing it, like going back and forth. It takes time, especially if the authors, like most authors, if they have day jobs and all that, it takes time for something to be ready. But it's like a really fulfilling part of translating. And you learn about the poet, you learn about the poem, you learn about languages involved. And I think it's like probably one of the best things about translating. And how I got into it, this sense of collaboration, sense of community, and so forth.
And Thila, does collaboration come into your work when you're translating?
Like if I'm thinking about a theme that I want to focus on, yes, I do contact the poets, and then we work through selecting the poems that are probably that speak to the themes, right? And then we work together that way. And I live in Canada and I work with poets in India, and so it's a different dynamics here. I mean, I don't live in India to even to be aware of the issues that they are talking about too. I mean, in terms of personally aware of the issues. So there are times I have to ask questions and for clarification, and that's how the collaboration happens. Yeah.
And do you find that
for me to yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you find that the poets you're working with in India are receptive and happy to work with a translator who is based out of the country? Because obviously that does make a difference in how those translations will be produced.
Yes, they are, because this is an opportunity for them to have their poems read by a Western audience, which probably, what happens is, they are writing for the local audience. So this opens up that they could talk to people outside of their region. And then, like, for example, this the eco poetry that they're talking about, they're talking to their own people, but, they would like to have this, like these issues, to brought into focus outside, like outside of their own region. Yes.
I suppose it's a sad fact that when it comes to ecological issues, a lot of the power is sitting in the hands of Western and nations. And so in terms of influencing policy, I suppose I'm interested in how the communities you're translating out of feel like there is an impetus aside from the fact whether that's a good thing or not, to try and influence those
Yeah.
Western policymakers as well, because obviously these are the people who are living directly on the front line of the climate crisis and
Yeah.
climate changes. So the audiences for eco poetry are interesting in their global dynamics, I suppose, is the point I'm getting at.
Yes,
That sounds.
yeah, yeah, I think so, because it also it gives them an opportunity to show a different perspective of things. The commercial purposes that is there, but then the price that is being paid by the people living there is what they are trying to get across.
Right. Just to kind of take us back to the language of the poems, Eric, you already referenced the title of one of the poems that you said was particularly difficult to translate, and so you decided not to translate it. I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit more about that word and that discussion, or if there was anything else in these poems that you've read for us today that gave you particular problems or excitements as a translator.
Yeah, so actually I think the May's poem Pasham, I think I placed it on my author's note about it. So yeah, it's basically like a Catholic practice of funeral prayers. And she was, well, taking off from Tila's point of, having a global audience. May's entire chapbook is actually about one tragedy here, where one Canadian mining company is largely responsible. So there's like one big facility. There's a mining facility on an island, and there was a big storm, and the I think like one facility of the mine broke, and it caused flooding with with chemicals and all that stuff. And yeah, and so there was May experienced that when she was a young girl, I think, and she was basically trying to recall the experience of having to attend several wakes at the time, and how how sad and how tragic it is, and it's also like very painful in trying to remember that. So Pasham definitely uh, captures that word more precisely, because it the practice of praying for 9 days starts when the person or the loved one passed away. So if the situation is it, or what prayer should we pray, that means it's a very subtle way of saying that it's a very widespread, and it's a very communal form of grieving of like what happened to them. So yeah, and when May told me that, like I said, yeah, go. Let's just put a note, and that's not a big problem. And another word that's interesting for me recently is from Jason Tabines's poem. Why don't you flee the town? So the word is, in Filipino, the word is, I think, likas, which actually translates closer to evacuate. Why didn't you evacuate the town? But at the same time, evacuate sounds really like developmentalist. It's like a language used by NGOs or by even the government, talking about relief operations. And I don't think people use that on a very everyday basis. But if you use the word flee, for example, I think it really emphasizes how leaving somewhere, especially a place where you grew up, because of danger, is actually a very emotionally difficult thing to do. Aside from like the obvious danger, you can't just leave your home that easily. And I really like this poem because this is basically like a recurring image whenever a big storm passes by. Is like a lot of people, usually detached from the tragedy, they would often criticize people on the path of storms. It's like, why don't you just leave? But at the same time, it's not that simple. Especially if you live in a country, there's not a lot of social safety nets, for example. Even disaster relief operations are not very great, and things are getting worse, especially with climate change, where there are more storms, unpredictable storms. They're stronger, and yeah, and it's very tragic because I think these type of incidents will happen more frequently, and they have been happening more frequently. And yeah, I think those are just the ones that took me a while before deciding which words to choose.
And Thila, can I ask you the same question? Was there anything that you struggled and wrestled with, or were particularly happy when you found a way through in the translation?
All right. I guess in translation, we are always striving for the transition of the text from one language to another, and kind of make it seem as if it was originally written in the target language without losing the integrity of the source text. And the thing is, the poetry as an expression of emotion and imagination poses a special challenge from a stylistic perspective. I think, there are idiomatic expressions, untranslatable words, and like Eric mentioned, and cultural nuances to take into consideration. So each translation always presents its unique challenges, and I kind of work through it, trying to find the right words to express, what the author is trying to say. In Sempel, for instance, the author presents a cultural picture of the ritualistic preparations of getting the paddy seeds ready for the fields, and followed by monsoons. And I think, communicating the narrative, it took me a while to kind of find the right words to, put the piece together. But even then, after that, I struggled with finding an equivalent word for Sempel, which is a local term. It's totally untranslatable. I tried different words, but it didn't work. Then I decided to keep it the same word. And Sempel in Tamil refers to a flow of rainwater kind of inseparably mixed with fine soil and flowing. But I couldn't find just one word that will say in English term that will kind of express what that word means. So I kept the original, and because the audience wouldn't understand what that word means, I had to I kind of worked the meaning into the translation, kind of incorporated it in the translation.
Thank you. We've had a sort of related question from one of our audience members, and a regular contributor also to MPT. Do you always keep the original title of a poem but translate it into English, or do you sometimes give a poem a completely different title? And that is from translator Mamata Nanda. So Thila, maybe you want to answer first. Do you ever come up with a completely different title for a poem in English?
It won't be completely different. I think, I try to stay close to what the original is, and if I have difficulty finding it, occasionally what I'll do the same way as I did with Sempel, I'll use the same word because I don't want to, come up with a title that doesn't speak to the ideas that are expressed in the poem. So I would never change the title. I mean, even the translation will be pretty close to what the author is trying to say. If I'm not able to, then I'll keep the original title and try to work the meaning into the translation.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah, actually, May's poem, the Pasham, I think this is the first time. Well, I haven't published a lot, to be fair. But I think this is the first time I chose to stick with the original title. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting act, I think, from the point of view of a translator. I'm definitely considering it more now. But mostly in my experience, limited experience, I try my best to stick to the original title. Sometimes it's a few words longer, or shorter even. But yeah, it's definitely there. The intention to like stick as close to it is there. But yeah, I also don't have issues if if there are liberties taken, because honestly that's also like part of translating. And yeah, and there are certain cases where it demands to be done that way.
Thank you. Excuse me. So another audience question is, who should we be reading from Tamil and Filipino poetry right now? So Thila, who should we be looking up? Who, obviously you've translated some great poets for us. Who else, if we want to learn more about Tamil poetry, should we be looking to read at the moment?
There's one other poet, I mean, whose works I have translated, but I mean, recently there hasn't been, like she hasn't published, much recently. But the one, there's Kanimuri Karunanidhi. It's a, she's actually an MP, I mean, Indian Parliament. Like she's an MP, and probably she's busy with that. But her works, I find that very compelling and interesting, and I think she'd be someone, if people are interested, will look for it and read. And because she's also talking about issues, and there'll be women's issues she talks about, and so other than that, I think I haven't translated many of the other Tamil poets. The only two Tamil poets I've been working with are these people, and so I do read some poems online, but I haven't actually contacted them to, my problem is, I have to get the books to Canada, because it's not easy always to get the textbooks here. And so I work with the writers, so I know, then I get any of their recent publications that I get, and then I read, and that's how I know. And so I would suggest anybody interested in reading, additional poems from Tamil to look for Kanimuri Karunanidhi's poems, and I'm sure they'll enjoy it.
Thank you. And Eric, who should we be reading from the Philippines?
Yeah, it's a tough question because, as I've said, the Philippines is actually an Anglophone country, so we actually have a lot of Filipino authors writing in English, and they're also really good too. But when it comes to translation, a few books have recently come out. Maybe slightly more books are coming out, maybe in the last 5 years, last 10 years. So people are realizing that translation is definitely an option rather than trying to write in English. So I really admire the work of Christine Ong Muslim. She's an author and a translator herself. She has translated books by Marlon Hakla, and the other one, Ayer, I know his nickname. Misandel Vertuso Arguillas. Both of those authors are translated by a UK publisher, actually. Broken Sleep Books. So like really small. Yeah. So there's not a lot of Filipino titles, and you will always find them in indie publishers. I hope that changes soon, but at the same time, it's also nice to stay in the indie circle, because you can do more things there. And then, just like Thila mentioned, since there's not a lot of books available, there's always online journals, which are like really helpful. Not just trying to reach an international audience, but like even this within here, the Philippines, because there's the publishing industry is not that vibrant. So going online and setting up like small indie presses, journals, is definitely an option. I think Words Without Borders has a really good folio from a few years ago, both fiction and poetry, and even nonfiction. Anomalous Press also has like really good folios with Filipino authors, and yeah, and I think those are the ones I can remember. But yeah, so it's basically, yeah, check out small presses and check out online journals. It could be, you know, Asian authors centric, but it doesn't have to be that way too. So it's everywhere. It takes an effort to find Filipino authors, but yeah, a lot of people are doing really good work right now.
Great, thank you. We're coming to the end of our event now. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who joined us today. We've got people I can see from around the world. It's always lovely to see the MPT kind of community come together in this way. And I'd also like to thank our supporters, Arts Council England and the Michael Marks Charitable Trust, who both supported this particular issue of MPT. I would love to thank Hayley and Michelle, who have provided our fantastic BSL interpretation today. Thank you both for joining us. If you have enjoyed listening to our readings today, just a reminder that you can still read Fresh and Salt, Focus on Water, and our archive for free for a couple more days. If you are not already a subscriber to the magazine, then do please consider it. We know that times are difficult for everyone around the world right now, but every subscription really does help. It helps us to pay all of our contributors, and it helps us to continue to publish and bring such amazing work from around the world together. And finally, I would just like to thank our readers, Eric and Thila, for joining us today from different ends of the day. Thank you very much. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed listening to them. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.